"Look under the table, sir." The boy's voice came from somewhere near Harrison Whitfield's left elbow, low enough that the string quartet on the far side of the room nearly covered it, but clear enough that Harrison heard every word. He had been lifting his wine glass to make a quiet toast to the man across from him, a Swiss banker named Lehman who had flown in that afternoon to discuss the sale of a copper mine in Zambia. His hand stopped halfway to his lips. He turned his head slightly. A boy of perhaps 11 years old stood beside his chair, holding a small silver pitcher of water as if he were one of the catering staff. He was not. Harrison knew every face that worked the formal dining room at Belgrave Manor, and he had never seen this child before. The boy was thin in the way that boys are thin when they have spent more days outside than in, and his black uniform jacket was a size too large at the shoulders. His eyes were lowered toward the centerpiece, but Harrison could see they were not looking at the centerpiece at all. They were looking very carefully at nothing in particular. "Excuse me," Harrison said, keeping his voice at the same conversational register he had been using all evening. The boy did not look up. He leaned forward to refill Harrison's already full glass, the gesture small and ordinary, and as he did he spoke again, even quieter than before. "Please, sir. Look under the table. Not now. After the next course. Drop your napkin." Then he straightened, gave a small bow that Harrison was certain no one at this dinner had taught him, and walked silently along the row of guests toward the sideboard at the far end of the room. Harrison set his wine glass down. He did so slowly, in the same careful way he did everything in front of an audience, because Harrison Whitfield had not built one of the largest private mineral holdings in North America by allowing his face to show what his mind was doing. The conversation around the table continued without interruption. Lehman was telling a story about a hunting trip in the Black Forest. Harrison's daughter-in-law Camille was laughing at the right places. Harrison's longtime partner in the firm, a man named Edgar Halloway, was nodding the way he always nodded when he was already thinking about the next sentence he would say. 12 people sat around the long mahogany table, and not one of them seemed to have noticed the boy. That fact alone, Harrison realized, was the first thing worth noticing. He picked up his wine glass again. He took a small sip. He smiled at Lehman's story without hearing the end of it. Outside the tall windows, the autumn light was failing across the eastern lawn, and the candles on the table had been lit perhaps 20 minutes earlier. The room smelled of beeswax, roasted lamb, and the small white flowers that Camille had arranged that afternoon in the low silver bowls along the center of the cloth. The next course arrived. 6 servers came through the side door at the same time, each carrying 2 plates, and they moved with the choreographed precision that Harrison had paid a great deal of money over many years to make appear effortless. The boy was not among them. Harrison watched the row of servers carefully without seeming to. None of them looked at the boy. None of them looked for him. It was as if the child had never been in the room. Harrison waited. He let the conversation drift for another minute, then 2. Edgar made a joke. Camille refilled her water glass herself. Lehman began another story. Harrison shifted his weight in his chair, and as he did, the white linen napkin that had been folded across his lap slid silently down the side of his leg and landed on the parquet floor beside his right shoe. "Pardon me," he said softly to no one in particular. He leaned to the side and reached down. And then, in the small triangle of darkness beneath the table, between the legs of his chair and the heavy carved leg of the table itself, Harrison Whitfield saw exactly what the boy had wanted him to see. It was a small black device, no larger than a deck of cards, fastened to the underside of the table with a strip of dark tape. A single red light blinked on its face at a steady, patient rhythm, the way a heartbeat blinks on a hospital monitor when nothing is yet wrong. Beside it, secured against the wood with a second strip of the same tape, was a slim metal cylinder about the length of a pen, with 2 thin wires running from its base into the body of the black device. Harrison Whitfield had spent 4 decades in the mining business. He had blasted through granite in 3 countries on 2 continents. He had paid for, signed for, and stood within 50 feet of more controlled detonations than most generals he knew. He recognized what he was looking at within a single second. he recognized something else as well. He recognized that the device had not yet been armed. The red light was a standby light. Whoever had placed it under the table was waiting for a signal to bring it to life, and that signal had not yet come. He picked up the napkin slowly. He sat back up. He laid the napkin across his lap and smoothed it once with his palm. His face did not change. "Layman," he said, picking up his wine glass again with a steady hand, "you were telling me about the stag, the one your brother shot through the shoulder." Layman, who had not noticed anything, picked up the thread of his story without missing a beat. Harrison nodded along, smiled at the right moment, even chuckled once. Inside his chest, his heart was beating with a slow and almost mechanical force that he recognized from other moments in his life. The moment he had been told his first wife had cancer. The moment a tunnel had collapsed in Sonora with 16 of his men still inside. The moment his son had called him from a hospital in Geneva. It was the heartbeat of a man whose body had understood the situation before his mind had finished cataloging it. He let his eyes move once around the table slowly, the way a host's eyes move when he is admiring his own dinner party. 12 guests, 3 of them were business. Layman, the Swiss banker; Edgar Halloway, his partner of 31 years; a woman named Patricia Vance from the Toronto office who managed the firm's North American licensing. 4 of them were family. His son Daniel and Daniel's wife Camille. His sister Margaret, visiting from Vancouver. His nephew Thomas, who had recently joined the firm in a junior capacity. 3 were old friends. The Donovans, who had known Harrison since university, and a retired federal judge named Whitman who lived 2 estates over. The remaining 2 were Camille's parents, in from Boston for the weekend. 12 people. One of them, Harrison understood with a calm that was almost frightening, had either placed the device themselves or knew it was there. Because the boy had said, "Look under the table," not "leave the room," not "evacuate." The boy had wanted him to see it. The boy had wanted him to know it was there before whoever planned to arm it had the chance. The boy had wanted him to look at the faces around the table while he still had time to read them. Harrison turned his head slowly, casually, toward the sideboard at the far end of the room. The boy was there. He was standing in the small alcove where the catering staff usually waited between courses, pretending to polish a silver tray with a folded cloth. His head was bowed, but Harrison saw that the boy's eyes, when they lifted for the briefest second, came directly to his. The boy gave the smallest possible nod. Then he looked back down at the tray. "Harrison," said Camille from across the table, "are you all right? You looked, for a moment, as though you were 1,000 miles away." Harrison turned back. He smiled at his daughter-in-law, the small private smile he reserved for her, the smile that had welcomed her into the family on the day she had first sat at this table 8 years earlier. "I was thinking about copper prices," he said. "Forgive me, the curse of an old man with too much on his mind." Layman laughed. Edgar laughed with him. Camille shook her head and reached for her water. Harrison Whitfield picked up his fork. He cut into the lamb with the steady hand of a man who had cut into 1,000 pieces of lamb in this very dining room. He lifted the bite to his mouth. He chewed. He swallowed. He nodded approvingly at Camille, who had selected the menu that afternoon, and Camille smiled back the way she always did when she was pleased that he had noticed. But beneath the napkin, beneath the table, beneath the polite scrape of silver against porcelain, Harrison's mind was working with a quiet and terrible clarity. The device under the table was not yet armed. That meant someone was waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for whom? A signal from inside the room or a signal from outside it? A phone call, a knock at the door, a particular word spoken by a particular voice across the polite drift of dinner conversation. Harrison did not know. But he understood, the way he understood the weight of an ore sample by simply holding it in his palm, that whatever the trigger was, it had not yet been pulled. And that meant he had a window, a small one, perhaps minutes, perhaps less. He let his eyes drift once more around the table, this time more slowly, the way a man's eyes drift when he is listening to a long story and his attention has begun to wander. He looked at each face. He looked at hands. He looked at where the wine glasses sat. He looked at who was glancing at the door and who was glancing at their phone and who was glancing at no one at all. Edgar Halloway was talking to Patricia Vance about the third quarter projections. His hands were on the table, one resting near his wine glass, the other holding his fork. His phone, Harrison noted, was not visible. Edgar always kept his phone in his jacket pocket, even at dinner. Harrison had teased him about it for 31 years. Patricia Vance had her phone face down beside her plate. She had glanced at it twice in the last 5 minutes. Harrison had counted. Daniel, his son, was leaning toward Margaret, laughing at something she had said. His phone was on the sideboard along with everyone else's, where Camille had insisted they all be placed at the beginning of the meal. Camille had a rule about phones at dinner. She had enforced it tonight as she enforced it every night. Thomas, his nephew, was sitting very still. He was eating, but he was eating in the slow and careful way that a person eats when they are not actually tasting their food. His eyes were on his plate. He had not laughed at any of Layman's stories. He had not spoken to anyone in nearly 20 minutes. Harrison felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty. Not yet. But a small, cold pebble of attention dropping into a pool that had until that moment been still. Thomas was 28 years old. He was the son of Harrison's late brother, who had died of a heart attack in a hotel in Singapore 11 years ago. Harrison had brought Thomas into the firm 2 years earlier as a favor to his sister-in-law, who had raised the boy alone after the funeral. Thomas had a graduate degree from a good school in London. He was intelligent in the careful, watchful way that some young men are intelligent when they have spent their childhoods listening to adults talk about money they did not yet have. He had been pleasant. He had been competent. He had asked, 6 months ago, to be given a larger role in the African operations, and Harrison had said he would think about it. Harrison had not yet given him an answer. Thomas's hand was not on the table. It was in his lap beneath the linen where Harrison could not see it. The hand stayed there. It did not move to lift a fork. It did not move to lift a glass. It simply rested where it could not be observed in the small private dark beneath the cloth. Harrison reached for his wine glass again. He took a sip. He set it down with great care. And then, without turning his head, without changing his expression, he spoke softly to Edgar across the table. "Edgar," Harrison said, "do you remember the name of that little restaurant in Lisbon? The one near the cathedral with the blue tiles in the courtyard?" Edgar looked up from his conversation with Patricia, slightly puzzled by the sudden turn in subject. "Lisbon," he said. "The blue tiles. You mean the place with the old woman who made the pastries? That's the one. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of it." "Casa Florinda," Edgar said. "Why, are you thinking of going back?" "I might be," Harrison said mildly. "I might be thinking of a great many things." He smiled at Edgar, and Edgar, who had known him for 31 years and who understood his old friend's face better than any other man on earth, smiled back without quite the same warmth. Something had moved behind Harrison's eyes that Edgar had seen only a handful of times in 3 decades. He did not know yet what it was, but he had been Harrison Whitfield's partner long enough to know that when that particular expression appeared, the wisest thing a man could do was wait and watch, and say nothing he had not already planned to say. Edgar nodded, picked up his glass, and turned his attention deliberately back to Patricia. But his right hand, which had been resting on the table, slid down to his lap. A moment later, Harrison saw the small bulge of Edgar's jacket pocket shift very slightly. Edgar had remembered just then exactly where his phone was, and he had remembered just then that he might want it within easy reach. Harrison felt a small, private gratitude that 31 years of working alongside the same man had built between them a language that did not require words. He turned now toward Camille, who was seated to his right. He laid his fingertips lightly on her wrist, the gesture of an affectionate father-in-law, and she turned to him at once with the bright, open attention she always gave him. "My dear," he said quietly, "would you do something for me?" "Of course." "I left a small velvet box on the desk in my study, a blue one. It contains a brooch that belonged to my mother. I had meant to give it to your mother tonight after dinner as a thank you for coming all this way. Would you slip out and bring it down, quietly? I do not want to spoil the surprise." Camille's face softened. She loved Harrison's mother's jewelry. She had loved it from the first time he had ever opened the drawer and shown her what was in it. "Of course," she said, "I'll go now. Take your time. The lamb is too good to rush back to." She squeezed his hand. She rose. She crossed the room with the easy grace that had been hers since the night Daniel had first brought her home, and she slipped through the tall double doors into the front hall. As soon as she was gone, Harrison turned his head, very slightly, toward the sideboard. The boy was still there, polishing the same silver tray. There was no box on the desk in the study. There never had been. But the study was at the back of the house, opposite the dining room, and the route to it took Camille past the kitchen, past the back hallway, past the discreet side door that the catering staff used to come and go. Once she was in that wing of the house, she would be out of the range of whatever the device under the table was meant to do. Whatever else happened tonight, Camille would not be in this room when it happened. That much, at least, Harrison had now arranged. 1 down. 10 to go. He could not, he understood, send all of them on errands without giving the game away. He could not stand up and announce that the room was to be cleared. The moment Thomas, or whoever Thomas was working for, or whoever was working through Thomas, understood that Harrison had seen the device, the signal would come. The signal would come fast. He needed another way. He turned to his sister Margaret, who was seated 3 places down on his left, and raised his voice just enough to carry. "Margaret," he said warmly, "before I forget, there is a letter in the front hall that came for you this morning from Vancouver, from the lawyer, I believe. It looked important. I had Doris set it on the console table by the front door so you would not miss it on your way out tonight. Perhaps you should look at it now before we get into the dessert and the brandy and the whole evening runs away from us." Margaret looked at him with the small, affectionate exasperation of an older sister. "Harrison, it can wait." "It came certified," Harrison said. "I signed for it myself. The man at the door said it was time-sensitive. I would not say anything if I did not think it mattered." Margaret hesitated. She glanced toward the doors. Then she set down her fork. "Very well," she said. "I will just have a quick look, save my place." She rose. She walked out of the dining room toward the front hall, leaving her wine glass half full and her plate half eaten. There was no letter on the console table. Harrison had never received any such letter. But the front hall was on the far side of the house from the dining room, and the front hall had heavy double doors that could be closed, and Doris, the household manager, was always somewhere near the front of the house at this hour of the evening. Margaret would find Doris. Margaret would ask Doris about the letter. Doris would be confused. The conversation would take time. Margaret would not be in this room. 2 down. Harrison reached for his wine again. He took a sip he did not taste. Across the table, Thomas had not moved. His left hand was still in his lap. His right hand was now resting on the stem of his water glass, but he was not drinking from it. He was holding it. His knuckles, Harrison observed, were slightly pale. Harrison thought very calmly, very precisely. He is waiting for something. He is not the one who will send the signal. He is the one who is waiting to receive it. That changed things. If Thomas was not the trigger, then the trigger was elsewhere, possibly outside the room, possibly outside the house, possibly outside the property. A phone call, a text, a timer, something that would arrive without warning and that Thomas had been told to wait for and that Thomas had been told to do something in response to. Do what exactly? Harrison did not know, but he could guess. Thomas's hand was in his lap. Thomas's hand was almost certainly resting on a phone. A phone set to silent. A phone whose screen would light up the moment the signal came. And then Thomas would do one of 2 things. He would either send a return signal, confirming that the room was as it should be, or he would press something on his own phone, and the red light under the table would stop being a standby light and would become something else. Harrison set down his wine glass. He needed to know what was on Thomas's phone. He needed to know without alerting Thomas. And he needed to remove Thomas from this table before whatever was about to happen happened. He looked once more, briefly, toward the sideboard. The boy was no longer polishing the tray. The boy was standing very still, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes lifted now, watching Harrison directly across the length of the long room. Harrison met his gaze for the briefest moment. He gave, with the smallest movement of his head, an almost imperceptible nod. The boy understood. The boy left the alcove. He walked along the side of the room behind the chairs in the unhurried way that a well-trained server walks when he is on an ordinary errand. He carried a small silver pitcher of water. He stopped behind Thomas's chair. He leaned forward to refill Thomas's already nearly full glass, and as he leaned, his elbow caught the back of Thomas's chair. The pitcher tipped. A small, cold cascade of ice water poured directly into Thomas's lap. Thomas leapt up with a sharp, involuntary cry. His chair scraped backward across the parquet with a sound that cut through every conversation at the table. Water was running down the front of his trousers, soaking through the gray wool, pooling on the seat of the chair behind him. He cursed, caught himself, looked around at the suddenly silent table and turned red. "I am so sorry, sir," the boy said immediately, his voice small and stricken in the way that only the voice of a frightened child can be. "I am so sorry. The pitcher slipped. I am so sorry." "It is fine," Thomas said tightly. "It is fine, it is fine." But his right hand had come up automatically when he leapt, and his left hand, the hand that had been in his lap for the past quarter of an hour, had come up with it. Something small and dark fell from his lap with a soft, sharp clatter onto the parquet floor between his feet. It was a phone. A black phone, slim, expensive, the screen face down. For one long second, no one moved. Thomas looked down at the phone. The boy, still holding the half-empty pitcher, looked down at the phone. Harrison, from his place at the head of the table, looked at the phone as well. And then, in the small, frozen instant before Thomas could react, Harrison saw something else. He saw that Thomas's eyes, when they came back up from the phone, did not go to the boy. They did not go to the soaked trousers. They did not go to Harrison. They went to Edgar Halloway. It was the briefest possible glance, a flicker. The kind of glance a man gives without meaning to, when something has gone wrong and he is looking by reflex to the only other person in the room who knows that something can go wrong. Edgar did not return the glance. Edgar was looking with apparent concern at Thomas's ruined trousers. Harrison felt the small, cold pebble in his chest grow, very quietly, into a small, cold stone. "Thomas," he said gently, "go upstairs and change. Use the guest room at the end of the second-floor hall. There is a set of clothes in the closet there that should fit you. I keep them for occasions when guests have accidents. Take your time. Doris can have your trousers cleaned by morning." "Sir, I am so sorry. Nonsense. It is only water. Go, the dinner can wait." Thomas hesitated. His eyes, just for a fraction of a second, flicked down toward the phone on the floor. He began, almost imperceptibly, to lean toward it. The boy was faster. "Let me, sir," the boy said, and crouched and picked up the phone and held it out toward Thomas with both hands. "I am so very sorry, sir. I will dry it for you. I will bring it up to your room in a moment after I have made sure it is not damaged." Thomas reached for the phone. His fingers closed around it. For a moment the boy did not let go. The two of them, the young man in his soaked gray wool and the thin child in his oversized black jacket, were both gripping the small black phone in the silence of the dining room. Then the boy released it and bowed slightly and stepped back. Thomas put the phone into the inside pocket of his jacket. He nodded once at Harrison. He turned and walked out of the dining room, his trousers leaving a small dark trail of water along the parquet. Harrison waited until Thomas's footsteps had faded up the main staircase. Then he turned slowly toward Edgar Halloway. Edgar was watching him. There was no smile on Edgar's face now. The polite warmth that had been there 10 minutes earlier was gone. Edgar's eyes were steady and dry and ordinary in a way that Harrison had seen over 31 years, in the eyes of many men across many negotiating tables. It was the look of a man who had just understood that something he had counted on was not going to go the way he had counted on it going. "Edgar," Harrison said softly, "may I have a private word with you in the library?" Edgar Halloway hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he smiled, the small, dry smile of a man who had decided in that 1 second that there was no graceful way to refuse. "Of course, Harrison," he said. He set his napkin beside his plate. He stood. "Layman, you must forgive us. A small piece of business that cannot wait. We shall return in 5 minutes." Layman waved a hand and reached for his wine. The Donovans began a new conversation with Camille's parents about the difficulty of finding good help in Boston. The judge said something dry to Patricia Vance. Daniel laughed politely at something his mother-in-law said. The dinner closed over the gap left by Thomas and Edgar like water closing over a small stone dropped into a pond. Harrison stood. He walked, at his usual measured pace, toward the side door that led to the library. Edgar followed. As Harrison passed the sideboard, he caught the boy's eye for the briefest moment. He did not nod. He did not signal. He simply looked, and the boy looked back, and a small and complete understanding passed between them that did not need any motion at all. The library was 3 doors down a paneled hallway. Harrison opened the door, stepped inside, and held it for Edgar. Edgar entered. Harrison closed the door behind them. The library was a long room lined floor to ceiling with books that Harrison had actually read, which was something he was quietly proud of. A fire was burning low in the marble hearth. 2 leather chairs faced each other across a small round table. Harrison did not sit. Neither did Edgar. "How long," Harrison said quietly, "have you been planning this?" Edgar did not pretend. That was, Harrison thought, the one mercy of dealing with a man you had known for 31 years. He did not pretend. He looked across the small round table at Harrison, and his face was tired and old and almost relieved, the face of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was, in a strange way, glad to set it down. 18 months, Edgar said. Harrison absorbed this. Why? You were going to sell to Layman, Edgar said. You were going to sell Zambia. You were going to take the money and walk away and leave the rest of us to manage what was left, and what was left would not have been worth managing. You know that as well as I do. The Zambian operation is the only thing keeping the rest of the firm solvent for the next decade. Without it, the African portfolio collapses, the Toronto office collapses, half the men in the field offices lose their pensions, and I lose everything I built alongside you because I am 2 years from retirement, Harrison, and my stake in this firm is the only stake I have. You could have come to me. I did come to you, 4 times. You did not listen. You wanted out. You said you were tired. I am tired. Yes, Edgar said. And I am 68 and my wife is sick and I have 2 grandchildren in school and I could not afford to be tired. Harrison looked at him for a long time. He looked at the man who had stood beside him at his first wife's funeral. He looked at the man who had flown to Sonora at 3 in the morning when the tunnel had collapsed. He looked at the man who had once, in 1997, lent him $500,000 in cash from his own personal accounts to bridge a payroll that had nearly failed. He looked at all of it and he felt no rage and no shock, only a vast and almost geological sadness, the sadness of watching a long shelf of stone that you had thought was solid begin, finally, to crack along a seam you had never seen. "Thomas," he said, "my sister's boy could not have done this alone. Your sister's boy. He needed the money. His mother needed the money. I needed the firm. We needed you to die in a way that looked like an accident before you could sign Layman's papers. And the device under the table," Harrison said, "was never going to kill all of you," Edgar said quietly. "It was placed at your end. The shaped charge points up and forward toward your chair. The blast radius is small. Layman, perhaps, if he was unlucky. Possibly me, depending on where I was sitting when it went. Everyone else would have walked away with cut faces and a story to tell for the rest of their lives. The investigators would have found a faulty gas line in the cellar. They would not have looked for anything else. I made sure of that. You made sure of that. I have spent 18 months making sure of that, Harrison. 18 months. Do not insult either of us by asking again whether I was serious." Harrison was silent for a long moment. The fire moved softly in the hearth behind him. Somewhere in the house, far away, he heard the small, distant sound of Camille's heels on the hardwood, returning from the study without a brooch she had not been able to find. "Who else?" Harrison said. "No one else at this table, Thomas, myself. A man you have never met who built the device, that is all. I did not bring anyone else into it. I am not a stupid man." "No," Harrison said. "You are not." He walked then, slowly, around the small round table. He did not approach Edgar. He walked instead to the heavy wooden desk against the far wall, and he opened the top drawer, and he took from it a small black object. It was a phone. It was not Harrison's usual phone. It was a second one, plain and unremarkable, that Harrison had kept in that drawer for nearly 20 years for reasons that had until tonight remained theoretical. He pressed a single key. "Detective Sandoval," he said, "this is Harrison Whitfield. I am in the library at Belgrave Manor. There is a device beneath the dining room table. It is not yet armed. The man who arranged it is standing across from me. The man who was meant to arm it is upstairs in the second-floor guest room and is almost certainly attempting at this moment to dry a phone. I would be grateful if you would come now. Quietly. The house is full of guests, and most of them do not know that anything is wrong." He listened for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he ended the call. He set the phone back into the drawer. He turned around. Edgar had not moved. "You called the police before dinner," Edgar said. "It was not a question. I called them 7 minutes ago, while I was lifting my wine glass to make a toast. The phone in my jacket pocket has a single button on the side. I had it built 3 years ago. I have never used it before tonight. 3 years ago. I am a wealthy man with a great many partners and a great many enemies. I have always assumed, Edgar, that someday one of them would surprise me. I had simply hoped foolishly that it would not be you." Edgar's face did not change, but something in his shoulders gave way. He reached behind him for the leather chair. He sat down in it heavily. He looked at his own hands resting on his knees. "How did you know?" he said. "How did you know tonight, of all nights?" Harrison considered the question. He considered the boy at the sideboard. He considered the small silver pitcher. He considered the quiet voice at his elbow, no louder than a whisper. "A child told me," he said. "A child. A boy, 11 years old. He is in my dining room at this moment, polishing a silver tray and pretending that the most important thing he has ever done is not what he did 15 minutes ago. I do not understand." "You would not," Harrison said softly. "You have lived among the wrong sort of people for too long, Edgar. You have forgotten the kind of person who notices what no one else notices, and who is brave enough when it matters to speak." The door to the library opened. Detective Sandoval entered without knocking, accompanied by 2 plainclothes officers and a third figure in a dark windbreaker carrying a small case of tools. They had come through the side entrance of the property. Harrison understood, the way he had instructed them to come if the call ever arrived. They had been within 4 minutes of Belgrave Manor for the past 3 years, on a quiet retainer that Harrison had never mentioned to anyone, not even to Edgar. Especially not to Edgar. "The dining room," Harrison said, quietly. "The device is beneath the head of the table, fastened to the underside with dark tape. It is not armed. The nephew is upstairs in the second-floor guest room with the trigger phone. He does not yet know that the signal will not come." Sandoval nodded once and was gone. The third figure followed her, moving toward the dining room with the small, contained urgency of a person who had spent a great many years walking calmly into rooms that other people were running out of. The 2 remaining officers stayed in the library. One stood beside the door. The other stood beside Edgar's chair. Edgar did not look up. Harrison walked back to the small round table and laid both his hands flat on its surface. He stood like that for a long moment, looking down at the grain of the wood, the small whorls and knots and veins that had been there for 200 years before he was born and would be there for 200 years after he was gone. "What will happen to my sister's boy?" Edgar said quietly. "That is not for me to decide," Harrison said. "It is for the courts. He is 28 years old. He is old enough. His mother, Harrison said, raised him after his father died, and she did her best, and her best was not enough to keep him from sitting at my table with a phone in his lap and waiting for permission to kill me. That is not her fault. It is not mine. It is his, Edgar, and it is yours." Edgar was silent. "You will lose everything," Harrison said. "The firm, the pension, the grandchildren in school. Your wife will hear about it from a reporter tomorrow morning before she has finished her tea. There is no version of the next 6 months that does not contain a great deal of pain for everyone you love. I want you to understand that I did not arrange that pain. You arranged it. I am only the man who happened to survive long enough to watch it begin." Edgar lifted his head finally and looked at him. "I am sorry, Harrison." "Yes," Harrison said. "I believe you are. That is one of the strange things I am going to have to think about for the rest of my life." He walked past the chair. He walked past the officer beside the door. He walked out of the library and down the paneled hallway and back into the dining room. The guests were no longer at the table. They had been moved, quietly and without panic, into the garden room at the back of the house. Harrison could see them through the open doors at the far end, gathered in small, confused clusters, holding their wine glasses, asking each other what was happening. Camille was among them, holding her mother's hand. Margaret was beside her, the unread letter forgotten. Daniel was on his phone. Layman was looking out the window with the patient expression of a man who had been in many places where things went sideways, and who had learned long ago that the best thing to do was wait. The dining room itself was empty except for the technician beneath the table and a single uniformed officer standing near the door. The technician was working with small, steady hands. The red light, Harrison saw, had stopped blinking. It was no longer lit at all. The boy was still at the sideboard. He had set down the silver tray. He was standing with his hands folded in front of him, looking very small in the oversized black jacket, looking very young in the candlelight that still moved softly along the walls. Harrison crossed the room and stopped in front of him. "What is your name?" Harrison said quietly. "Mateo, sir." "Mateo." "Yes, sir." Harrison knelt down slowly, the way he had not knelt in many years, until his eyes were level with the boy's. His knees protested. He ignored them. "How did you know, Mateo?" The boy looked at the floor for a long moment, then he looked up. "The man upstairs," he said. "Mr. Thomas. He came into the kitchen this afternoon to ask the cook for something. He did not see me. I was in the pantry behind the door. He was on his phone. He was talking to someone. He said the table had been prepared. He said the signal would come at 9:15. He said to make sure no one bumped his chair before then because the device was small and the trigger was on his phone, and if anyone jostled him at the wrong moment he could send the signal early by accident. And you understood." "I did not understand all of it, sir, but I understood enough. I understood that something bad was going to happen at this table tonight, and I understood that you were the man who would be sitting at the head of it. I have seen you before, sir. You sometimes walk in the garden in the mornings. You once said good morning to me when I was helping the gardener carry the bags of soil." "I did." "You did, sir, last spring." Harrison did not remember it. He found this suddenly unbearable. "Why did you not go to someone?" he asked. "The cook." "My household manager, anyone." "I did not know who else was helping him, sir. I did not know who I could trust. I only knew that I could find a way to be in this room tonight because the caterer was a man short and they asked the kitchen if anyone had a son old enough to carry pitchers. My uncle is the kitchen porter. He said yes for me before I could even speak. I borrowed the jacket from his nephew. It is too big." "I am sorry, sir." "Do not be sorry," Harrison said. "Do not ever be sorry for the size of the jacket you wore tonight." The boy did not understand. Harrison did not yet have the words to explain it to him. He thought he would in time, perhaps over many years. "Mateo," he said, "where is your mother?" "She works in a laundry in the city, sir. She works the night shift. She does not know I am here." "What is her name?" "Elena Cruz, sir." "And your father?" "He is dead, sir." 3 years. Harrison nodded slowly. He laid one hand very gently on the boy's small shoulder. "Mateo," he said, "listen to me carefully. What you did tonight was the bravest thing anyone has done in this house in 50 years. I have lived here for 30 of those years. I know what I am saying. You saved the life of an old man you did not know, and you did it at a risk you could not have measured, and you did it because you noticed something and refused to look away. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." "From tonight forward, you are not going to worry about your school. You are not going to worry about your mother's shift at the laundry. You are not going to worry about a jacket that fits. You will worry instead about what kind of man you wish to become, because the only thing left for you to decide is that, and the rest will be arranged. Do you understand me?" The boy looked at him for a long moment with eyes that did not yet know how to receive what was being said to them. Then slowly he nodded. Harrison stood. His knees protested again. He did not care. Outside the tall windows in the dark beyond the eastern lawn, the first of the police vehicles had begun to arrive without their lights, moving up the long gravel drive in a quiet procession. The candles on the table were still burning. The dinner, in every way that mattered, was finally over. If this story moved you, please tap the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so the next story finds you too. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The bravest voices in this world are often the smallest ones, and they only reach the people who need them when you help them travel.